What happens when your grief is so loud? The only one who can hear it is a creature who makes no sound at all. In the quiet hollows of the Shenandoah Mountains, an old man was about to find out. Arthur Pendleton was 75 years old, but his hands, gnarled and strong, remembered every song he'd ever played. He gripped the worn leather handle of his guitar case. The morning air was sharp, smelling of damp earth and decaying leaves. Each step on the half-mile path was a note in a song only he could hear. This was his ritual. This was his promise. The trees opened up into a small clearing, a place flooded with soft, golden light. He and his wife Eleanor had called it the cathedral. He unlatched the case, the clicks echoing in the silence. Inside lay a 1958 Martin D28, its wood aged to the color of dark honey. He settled onto a fallen log, his back straight, his weary eyes scanning the empty space around him. "Morning, Ellie," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse. He didn't wait for an answer. He never did. His calloused fingers found their place on the strings. The first chord rang out, a deep, mournful blues note that hung in the air, a sound full of memory and loss. He played the songs she loved, the ones they danced to in their small kitchen, the ones he wrote for her in the dead of night. He played for an audience of one, or so he thought. One Tuesday in early October, a flicker of movement at the edge of the clearing broke his concentration. His fingers froze on the strings. He saw a flash of tawny fur, the twitch of a tufted ear, and then nothing. It was gone as quickly as it appeared. A deer, maybe, or a fox. He shook his head, annoyed at the interruption. He was a proud man, and this time was sacred. He finished his song, packed his guitar, and walked back to the silent cabin. The image of that fleeting movement stuck in his mind. The next day, he played with a new kind of attention. He felt like he was being watched, and halfway through his second song, he saw it again. On a large, sun-warmed granite boulder across the clearing, a bobcat sat. It was perfectly still, its body low to the stone, its gaze fixed on him. It wasn't threatening. It was listening. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. He'd lived in these woods for 40 years and had seen a bobcat this clearly only a handful of times. He slowly, deliberately, began to play again. The cat's ears swiveled, tracking the sound. It didn't run. It simply stayed, a silent observer, until Arthur's final note faded into the trees. Then, with a flick of its short tail, it slipped off the rock and vanished. The visits became a pattern. Every day, just after 9 a.m., Arthur would arrive. And every day, the bobcat would appear on its granite perch. It was a female, he decided. There was a certain sleek grace to her movements. He started calling her the listener. He never spoke to her. He never tried to get closer. They shared an unspoken agreement, a boundary of silence and distance. The clearing was their shared space. His music was the bridge between their two separate worlds. His lonely ritual now had a witness. The grief was still there, a heavy weight in his chest, but it was no longer a solitary burden. He started talking to Ellie more as he played, telling her about their strange guest. "You'd like her, Ellie," he'd murmur between songs. "She's got quiet eyes, like you did." The music itself began to change. The deep sorrow was still there, but now a thread of something new wove through it. A note of wonder, a strange, wild kind of companionship. The quiet rhythm of his life felt settled. But the world outside his wooded sanctuary had its own rhythms, and it was about to come crashing in. A cloud of dust announced the arrival of a car that didn't belong. A clean, sensible sedan from the city. His granddaughter Chloe stepped out, her face a familiar portrait of concern. At 28, she was a paralegal in D.C., a world of concrete and deadlines that felt a million miles away from Arthur's cabin. "Grandpa," she said, her voice tight as she surveyed the peeling paint on the porch. "You're not answering your phone." Arthur just grunted, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "Phone's for people who want to talk." Chloe's worried eyes scanned him. His flannel shirt hung looser than she remembered. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper. "You look thin. Are you eating properly?" He bristled at the question. "I'm 75, Chloe, not 5. I know how to feed myself." The visit was tense. She tried to clean, to organize the quiet chaos of his cabin. He pushed back against her every effort. She represented a world that had moved on without Eleanor, a world he wanted no part of. "You should think about selling," she said softly one afternoon, gesturing to the sprawling woods. "You could get a nice apartment near me. Be safer." Arthur's face hardened. He turned to her, his voice low and dangerous. "This is my home. This was our home. It's not for sale." Chloe left 2 days later, her frustration a palpable cloud between them. As he watched her car disappear down the dirt road, a bitter sense of victory soured in his mouth. He was alone again, just how he liked it. A few days later, while walking the property line, he saw it. A flash of unnatural color, tied to an old oak tree. It was a strip of bright pink plastic surveyor's tape. He ripped it off the bark, his hands trembling with a sudden, cold fury. The brochure arrived a week later. Glossy paper, pictures of smiling couples hiking on pristine trails. The logo was for a company called Appalachian Ascendancy. It detailed plans for a luxury mountain resort, complete with a spa, a golf course, and exclusive woodland estates. It also included a polite, form letter offer to purchase his land. Arthur stared at the map. The proposed golf course cut directly through his clearing, through the cathedral. He crumpled the brochure and tossed it into the wood stove, watching the smiling faces turn to black ash. He thought that would be the end of it. He was wrong. A week later, a shiny black SUV pulled up to his cabin. A man in a suit that looked too tight and too expensive stepped out. He had slicked back hair and a smile that didn't touch his cold, calculating eyes. "Mr. Pendleton?" he said, extending a hand Arthur refused to shake. "Mark Jennings, Appalachian Ascendancy. I'm here to follow up on our generous offer." Jennings walked around the porch as if he already owned it, his city shoes scuffing on the old wood. "This is prime real estate, sir. But it needs vision. We have that vision." Arthur's hands clenched into fists. "This land has all the vision it needs," he said, his voice flat. "It's not for sale." Jennings's smile widened. It was a predatory, condescending expression. "Everything is for sale, Mr. Pendleton. It's just a matter of finding the right price. We're prepared to be very persuasive." Arthur felt a tremor of rage go through his body. He pointed a single, knotted finger down the driveway. "Get off my property, now." The confrontation with Mark Jennings lit a fire under Arthur. His daily trips to the clearing took on a new urgency. He was no longer just preserving a memory. He was defending a fortress. He played with a ferocity he hadn't felt in years, his blues licks turning into defiant anthems. He started talking to the listener about it, his voice a low growl. "They want to put a golf course here," he told the Bobcat. "Can you believe that? Pave over Ellie's garden. Tear down these trees." The Bobcat just watched, its amber eyes unblinking. The stress and the encroaching cold of November began to take their toll. A cough settled deep in Arthur's chest. A weariness sank into his bones that sleep couldn't fix. He lost weight, but he didn't miss a single day in the clearing. The music was his fuel. One morning, as he approached his playing spot, he saw something on the ground near the log. It was a squirrel, freshly killed, laid out neatly on a bed of leaves. He stopped, staring. He knew it wasn't a gift in the human sense. It was likely the bobcat's cached meal. But in that moment, in the cold, silent woods, it felt like an offering, a sign of allegiance, a wild, brutal confirmation that he was not alone in this fight. He felt a surge of strength. He and the listener, they would hold the line. The phone rang late one night, shrill and unwelcome. It was Chloe. Her voice was sharp, professional. "Grandpa, I did some digging on Appalachian ascendancy." Arthur grunted. "Don't need you to." "Yes, you do," she insisted. "They have a pattern. They target elderly landowners with legal pressure. They find zoning loopholes, environmental survey errors. They bleed them dry until they have no choice but to sell for a fraction of what the land is worth." Arthur felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft in the cabin. "I can handle it," he said, his pride a stubborn wall. "No, you can't." Chloe's voice cracked with frustration. "This isn't about fixing a fence. This is a legal fight. Let me help you. I can file an injunction. I don't need a lawyer from the city." He cut her off, his voice colder than he intended. "I've lived here my whole life. I know how to protect my home." He hung up before she could reply, the silence of the cabin pressing in on him. The next day, the sky turned a bruised metallic gray. The wind howled through the pines, carrying the first stinging pellets of ice. A major winter storm was rolling in. Arthur buttoned his flannel shirt, grabbed his guitar, and headed for the door, his cough rattling in his chest. He had a promise to keep. The clearing was waiting. But as he stepped onto the porch, a wave of dizziness washed over him. The world tilted, the trees spinning. His legs gave out, and he crumpled to the wooden planks, the guitar case clattering beside him. The last thing he saw before the world went black was the first snowflake landing on his worn-out boot. Before we continue, let us know from which city you are. We are interested to know from where our videos are watched. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your rating. This gives us motivation to make new and interesting videos. So, let's get started. Inside the cabin, the world was a fever dream. Arthur lay on the cold floorboards of the porch, the melting snow soaking into his flannel shirt. He drifted in and out of a blurry consciousness. He was vaguely aware of the cold, of a pain in his chest that felt like broken glass. In his delirium, he was back in the clearing. Ellie was there, her hand outstretched. But the space between them kept growing. He tried to play for her, but his fingers were numb, useless. The strings wouldn't make a sound. The music was gone. And in the real world, in the Shenandoah woods, the silence was absolute. For the first time in over a year, 9 a.m. came and went without a single note of a guitar. The cathedral was empty, the air heavy only with the sound of ice ticking against frozen branches. On her granite boulder, the listener waited. She was a creature of routine, her life dictated by the sun, the seasons, and the hunt. And for a full season, her routine had included this strange, resonant sound. Now, it was absent. She scanned the clearing, her tufted ears twitching, listening for something that wasn't there. The silence was wrong. It was a disruption, a tear in the fabric of her territory. She waited for an hour, then 2. The unease grew. This was not just a missing sound. It was a missing presence. Driven by an instinct she couldn't comprehend, she slipped off the rock and began to move. Not towards her hunting grounds, but in the opposite direction. She followed the scent trail she knew so well, the one that smelled of old wood, sweat, and the man who made the sounds. 200 miles away, in a sterile Washington, D.C. office, Chloe Pendleton stared at her phone. She had called her grandfather's landline 5 times. It just rang and rang. She told herself he was just being stubborn after their argument, that he'd left the phone off the hook. But the worry was a cold knot in her stomach. She checked the weather app. A major ice storm was battering the Shenandoah Valley. Roads were closed. Power outages were widespread. The knot in her stomach tightened into pure fear. He was out there, alone, in that old, drafty cabin. His cough had sounded terrible over the phone. She packed a bag in 5 minutes, her movements sharp and efficient. She threw in a first aid kit, blankets, and a heavy-duty flashlight. Her boss protested, telling her she couldn't just leave. "Family emergency," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Her sharp, practical mind was racing, calculating risks. The drive would be treacherous, dangerous. But the image of her grandfather, thin and frail, alone in that storm, was far more terrifying. She had to go. She had to know he was okay. As she merged onto the highway heading west, the rain began to turn to freezing sleet, coating her windshield in a thin layer of ice. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, her gaze fixed on the treacherous road ahead. Back on Arthur's land, a different kind of intrusion was taking place. A courier van, its tires spinning on the icy dirt road, stopped at the rusted gate. A man in a heavy winter coat got out, a large waterproof envelope in his hand. He struggled to the mailbox and shoved it inside, the metal door groaning in protest. Inside the envelope was not a friendly offer. It was a formal legal notice from Appalachian Ascendancy's attorneys. It cited a recently discovered discrepancy in a century-old survey of the property lines. It alleged that a significant portion of Arthur's land, including the area with unobstructed valley views, the clearing, was, in fact, part of an adjacent parcel the company had already acquired. It was a lie, a carefully constructed legal fiction designed to intimidate and overwhelm. It gave him 30 days to legally contest the claim or forfeit the land. The letter was a declaration of war, delivered under the cover of the storm, addressed to a man who couldn't even stand up. It sat in the cold metal box, a time bomb waiting to go off, while the man it was meant for fought a much more immediate battle for his life, just a few hundred feet away. The Bobcat moved with immense caution. This was new ground. The scent was strong here, leading directly to the strange, hard-sided den the man used. She crept through the undergrowth, her paws silent on the frosted ground. The cabin loomed before her, a dark shape against the swirling snow. Every instinct told her to stay back, to retreat to the safety of the deep woods. But the silence pulled her forward. The disruption was too great. She paused at the edge of the yard, her body low. No movement, no sound. Only the whistle of the wind and the clatter of ice falling from the eaves. Slowly, hesitantly, she crossed the open space and leapt onto the porch. The wood was foreign under her paws. She crept to the low window, the same one Arthur sometimes stared out of in the mornings. She peered inside. It was dark, but her eyes adjusted. She could make out a shape on the floor, a lump, unmoving. It was the man. She watched for a long time, her head cocked, trying to process the scene. The lack of movement was wrong. The silence was wrong. She padded to the front door, sniffed at the crack at the bottom, and then settled down by the doorframe, a wild, confused sentinel keeping a vigil in the heart of the raging storm. The last 20 miles of Chloe's drive were a nightmare. The roads were sheets of ice. Downed trees littered the shoulders. It took her almost 2 hours. When she finally turned onto the dirt road leading to the cabin, she was running on pure adrenaline. Her sedan slid, the tires finding no grip, but she wrestled it forward. As she rounded the final bend, her headlights cut a swath through the darkness, illuminating the front of the cabin. And then she slammed on the brakes. Her heart leaped into her throat. Frozen in the beam of her headlights, sitting on the porch as if it belonged there, was a bobcat. It wasn't a kitten. It was a full-grown, wild animal. It stared back at her, its eyes reflecting the light, two glowing embers in the storm. For a second, Chloe couldn't breathe. Her mind struggled to make sense of the image. A bobcat, on the porch. It was impossible. She blinked, thinking the exhaustion was making her see things. But it was still there. The animal held her gaze for a long, tense moment. Then it rose with a fluid, silent grace, leaped off the porch and vanished into the swirling snow as if it were a ghost. Shaken, Chloe stumbled out of the car. The sight of the cat was terrifying, but it was also a blaring alarm bell. Something was deeply wrong. She ran to the door. "Grandpa!" she screamed, pounding on the wood. "Grandpa, open up!" Only the wind answered. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the tire iron from her trunk, wrapped her scarf around it, and smashed the small window pane by the doorknob. She reached through, her hand shaking, unlocked the door, and burst inside. The cabin was freezing. The air was still. And there, on the floor, half in the hallway, lay Arthur. His skin was pale, his lips tinged with blue. She fell to her knees beside him, her fingers searching for a pulse. It was there, faint, thready. "Oh God, Grandpa," she whispered. She pulled her phone out, her fingers clumsy with cold and panic. She dialed 911. "I need an ambulance," she choked out, her voice breaking. "My grandfather has collapsed. He's not responsive. We're at..." She gave the rural address, her voice rising in desperation as she looked out the broken window at the impenetrable storm. "Please, you have to hurry. I don't know how long he has." The paramedic's voice on the line was calm, but distant, a lifeline in the roaring chaos. Chloe followed his instructions, her paralegal mind focusing on the checklist of actions. She rolled Arthur onto his side. She covered him with the blankets from her car. She kept talking to him, her voice a steady presence in the freezing cabin, telling him he was a stubborn old fool and that he wasn't allowed to leave her. Every minute felt like an hour. The wail of a distant siren, fighting its way through the storm, was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. The paramedics were professionals, their movements swift and sure in the cramped cabin. They worked on Arthur, their voices a low murmur of medical terms, before loading him onto a stretcher. As they carried him out into the swirling snow, Chloe grabbed his guitar case. She wasn't leaving it behind. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit world of the hospital, the wildness of the Shenandoah felt a universe away. The beeping of a heart monitor replaced the sound of the wind. Chloe sat by Arthur's bed for 2 days, watching his chest rise and fall, a cup of cold coffee in her hand. When he finally woke up, his eyes were clear, but the stubborn fire in them was gone, replaced by a deep, weary vulnerability. "Chloe?" he rasped, his voice a faint whisper. "I'm here, Grandpa," she said, taking his hand. It felt frail in hers. "You scared me." He looked at the white ceiling, the tubes connected to his arm. The wall of his pride, built over a year of grief and isolation, had crumbled. "I was a stubborn old fool," he admitted. Later that day, he told her everything. Not just about the land and the developers, but about the clearing, about the ritual, and about the listener. He described the bobcat not as a pet or a friend, but as a silent witness, a wild presence that honored his grief when the human world could not. "She listens," he said, his gaze distant. "The music? It was for Ellie, and then it was for her too." Chloe didn't doubt him. She didn't think he was crazy. In that moment, she finally understood. The bobcat wasn't just an animal. It was a symbol of the profound, unspoken connection he had to that land. It was the last thread holding him together. After a few days, when Arthur was stable, Chloe drove back to the cabin to collect some of his things. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world encased in glittering ice. As she pulled up, she saw the mailbox, slightly ajar. She opened it and pulled out the thick, waterproof envelope from Appalachian Ascendancy. Back in the warmth of her car, she tore it open. It wasn't an offer. It was a legal notice. A claim of adverse possession based on a fabricated survey dispute. Her fear for his health quickly turned to a cold, sharp anger. This was her world. Law, documents, predatory clauses. They had timed this perfectly, an attack under the cover of a storm against a man they thought was weak and alone. "Not anymore," she whispered, her knuckles white as she gripped the papers. Then, the image flashed in her mind. The bobcat's glowing eyes in her headlights. A wild animal on the porch. An impossible, unnatural behavior. It wasn't a ghost. It was evidence. A creature of habit so conditioned to a routine that its disruption drove it out of its territory. A spark of an idea ignited in her mind. A long shot. But it was a weapon. They wanted to fight with surveys and deeds. She would fight with claws and teeth. When Arthur was released from the hospital, he was a changed man. He was weaker, thinner, and leaned heavily on a cane. But the defiant hardness in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet resolve. Chloe moved into the guest room, her laptop a permanent fixture on the kitchen table. "We'll fight them, Grandpa," she said, showing him the legal notice. "But we'll do it my way this time." He just nodded, trusting her. Chloe's DC contacts were useless here. She needed local knowledge. She found an environmental law professor at a nearby university, a man who had spent his life fighting developers in the Blue Ridge Mountains. She told him the entire story, from the music in the clearing to the bobcat on the porch. The professor listened intently. He explained that proving a critical habitat, especially for a solitary animal like a bobcat, was difficult. But the consistency of the behavior was compelling. They needed proof. Chloe bought a set of high-end trail cameras. She and Arthur, walking slowly, set them up on the path to the clearing and around the perimeter of the cathedral. They didn't go inside. They wouldn't disturb the space. Arthur was still too weak to make the trek every day. So, he started a new ritual. Every evening, as the sun went down, he would sit in a rocking chair on his porch, his old Martin D28 in his lap. He'd play softly, the gentle blues notes drifting out into the twilight. On the third evening, he saw her. At the far edge of the woods, just beyond the yard, a familiar shape emerged. The listener sat and watched him, a silhouette against the darkening trees. She stayed for the duration of one song, then turned and melted back into the shadows. Arthur smiled, a real smile that reached his weary eyes. The music had returned. The connection held. It was spring. The mountainside exploded in a riot of green. The legal battle with Appalachian Ascendancy had become a grinding war of attrition. Chloe's injunction, supported by the professor's testimony and weeks of trail camera footage, had forced a temporary halt to any survey or clearing work. The footage was undeniable. It showed the female bobcat using the clearing as a central part of her territory. And even more compellingly, it captured images of her with two small, spotted kits. The cathedral was not just a sanctuary for Arthur's grief. It was a den, a nursery. The developers were furious, but the state's Environmental Protection Agency was now involved. The land was safe, at least for now. Arthur was stronger. The cane was gone. The color had returned to his face. One bright April morning, he picked up his guitar case. The half-mile walk felt different. His steps were lighter. He wasn't walking toward a memory of death, but toward a celebration of life. He reached the clearing. It was vibrant, humming with the energy of spring. He sat on his usual log and took out his guitar. He took a deep breath, not of sorrow, but of the sweet, earthy air. He began to play. It was a new song, a melody that was less about loss and more about quiet, resilient gratitude. As the notes filled the air, a familiar, graceful shape emerged from the trees. The listener, sleek and confident, leaped onto her sun-warmed boulder. She settled in to watch him, her two curious kits peeking out from behind the rock, their ears twitching at the strange, beautiful sound. Arthur looked at his silent, wild audience, and the Shenandoah Sonata continued. Was the Bobcat acting on instinct and disturbed routine? Or do you believe a deeper, unexplainable connection formed between it and Arthur?